Good evening, Kaya family. We are here and we are back for another amazing Kaya experience. And we are here under the topic Black Ability, White Fragility, Race Issues in 2020, shifting the burden of dismantling racism to the ones who profit from it. This is going to be a very open and very engaging dialogue. And without further ado, I really want to go ahead and get ready to introduce our panelists. I see our pastor, Reverend Dr. Robert C. Scott, is here as well. But I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists. First up is Rabbi Judy Schindler. As rabbi, as wife, as mom, professor, activist, and author, Rabbi Judy is an innovator, leading the creation of three Telly Award-winning social justice documentaries addressing diversity in schools, urban education, affordable housing, and in 2011 she was also named Charlotte's Woman of the Year. And among all of those awards, she is also Rabbi Emeriti of Temple Beth El in Charlotte. Next up, we have Reverend Patency, who we will show later. Reverend C serves as the Minister of Youth and Children here at St. Paul, a native of Fredericksburg, Virginia, and a graduate of Virginia Tech. Reverend C is also currently a student at Gardner-Webb University, where he is studying to obtain his Master of Divinity degree. And we are definitely excited to have Reverend C here with us. Next up will be Minister Josh Jordan. Josh is an associate minister of St. Paul, and he also serves with the youth and the children, as well as the young adult ministry. Josh is a graduate of the University of Houston, and as one of the youngest voices on the panel, we understand Josh's worth. Josh is really here because of his work. Josh has a keen awareness of the difficulties that African Americans face economically and the challenges many face assimilating into white dominant corporate enterprises. In the future, Minister Josh plans to start his own financial services company to help families build wealth and to promote financial literacy amongst minority communities. Next up, we have a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Ben Boswell. Dr. Boswell serves as the senior minister of the Myers Park Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, where he became the youngest senior minister to serve at Myers Park. We are very elated to have him, and we call him Doctor with great joy, as he is a newly minted doctor, just graduating with his PhD. In North Carolina, Dr. Ben has been actively engaged in calling to protect religious liberty and advancing the inclusion of LGBTQ persons. He also serves on the board, the Alliance of Baptists. Next up, we have Mrs. Charlita Hatch, a very dear friend of mine. Charlita is the current president of the Junior League of Charlotte and its third Black president in 95 years. She is a native of Charlotte and was also recognized as one of Charlotte's 40 under 40 by Charlotte Business Journal. She is the wife to Mark, the mother to Mark Jr., and she is also the author of a children's book titled Black Boy Joy, which can be found on Amazon. Next up, we have Reverend Laurie Rabel. Reverend Rabel is the pastor of Selwyn Presbyterian Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. She is a graduate of Wake Forest University, where she was a member of the cross country and track and field teams. She earned her Master of Divinities from Union Presbyterian in Charlotte in 2006, and she is a current board member of the Board of Trustees of Union Presbyterian Seminary. In conjunction with her call to Selwyn, she also enjoys preaching and writing for other various organizations and publications, including her website. She is also the wife of Rob Rabel and the mother of their two children, Joe and Maeve. There we go. Thank you. Next up, we have one of my favorite people, our very own First Lady Piers Scott. She is the First Lady of the St. Paul Baptist Church and also a trustee of the local school here, of the local Christian school board here in Charlotte. For the past 4 years, she has met with multi-ethnic women to gather and to find common ground as they celebrate their uniqueness. In January, she became co-facilitator of a cross-racial small group assembled to foster greater understanding between persons of color and white people. Lady Pierre has more than 20 years of experience in corporate America as PR and media strategist, and since 2012, she has been an independent contractor for Treetop Consulting Incorporated, a boutique media strategy firm that is based in Chicago that is currently advising clients through transition to a greater racial awareness and more equitable working places. Next up, we have our very own pastor, the Reverend Dr. Robert Charles Scott, a gifted preacher, a voice of the prophets. Dr. Scott is a graduate of Jackson State University, Duke Divinity School, and United Theological Seminary, where he serves on the board of trustees. He also serves as the necrologist of the infamous Hampton Assistant Secretary. Amen. We thank God for correction. Of the infamous Hampton University Ministers Conference. And he would probably cut my mic right now if I did not tell you that he is a proud member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated and award winner of the Citizen of the Year. But his greatest accomplishment is being the husband of Lady Scott and the father of the boss, Miss Chair Scott.
That's right.
Last but not least, our moderator for tonight, Reverend D'Angelo Dia. Reverend Dia is a poet, an activist, a scholar, a theologian. Reverend Dia has studied in Athens, Greece, Guadalajara, Mexico, and Nairobi, Kenya. He received his Bachelor of Applied Communications and Sociology from Appalachian State University, a Master of Arts in Literature from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and a Master of Divinity from Union Presbyterian, where he is also currently a doctoral student. He is also a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, where he serves as the co-chair for the Political Action Committee. Family, that was a lot. It was long. But as you can see, we have pulled together one of the most diverse and thought-provoking panels that can be offered for such a conversation as this. So I ask you now to just sit back, let everybody open their hearts, open their minds to the conversations that is to come. To aid us in our effort is our very own minister of music, Maestro David Scott Gibson, who has written a new song entitled Black Diamond that will lead us into this discussion. And at this time, this will be the last time that you see me for tonight. So I want to thank you for watching. And as the blood of my ancestors stains this stolen land, we will come out of our gloomy past where our bright light will still shine bright. God bless and Ashe.
I can't grab air to save my black life. People everywhere and no help in sight. On bended knee, some say white is right. And for all my soul's right black as night, I can't find a place to be where it's no crime to be me. Both chosen and marked to marked royalty, they can't unsee because I shine like black diamonds, and they see, oh, I know they see, I shine like black diamonds, so they mine for me. Subject of the evil gaze at a tender age, some memories just won't fade. There I learned the low ones would degrade me with such hate. But I grew strong and smiled like brighter days anyway. I still long for brighter days under the devil's shade, where I shine like diamond, and God values me so much more. Yeah, I shine like diamond. I'm the one made to adore, because I shine like diamond, and they see, oh, I know they see, yes, I shine like diamond, so they mine for me. For sure they'll with my life again, and for sure I'll risk my life again, being. For sure they'll tell the truth again, and for sure I'll shine through again, oh, like black diamond. Oh, sure. Sister, you a black diamond. Hey, for sure. Brother, you're a black diamond. Hey, for sure. Oh, look how we shine like black diamond, for sure.
Greetings, St. Paul. So our discussion will cover three specific areas this evening. The first area is Black pride and Black pain. The second area is white privilege and white supremacy. And the third area is where do we go from here? So a few things about this conversation to the panelists. I'm asking that you be crisp and core with your responses. Embrace discomfort. This could be a sensitive conversation, just go with it. And share your truth. Be as transparent as you could possibly be this evening. At this time, I'm going to ask Dr. Scott if you could contextualize the significance and the meaning of this panel discussion for us, please.
All right. First of all, I want to say good evening to all of those who are checking us out as far as our live stream is concerned. And I want to kind of set the tone and the tune for the conversation for tonight. Give me about 3 minutes, because that's about how long it's going to take for me to do this. It was W.E.B. Du Bois who said in his seminal work, The Soul of Black Folk, that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. And I would dare say that the problem of the 21st century is the problem of the color line as well. And so tonight we bring together people from the white church, as well as the black church, as well as other right religious circles, to engage in conversation that hopefully and prayerfully will be prophetic, priestly, and pastoral, as far as helping us to think beyond ourselves. Because I contend that the problem of 2020 is still the problem of the color line. So here we are, fighting the same issues that we were fighting in 1920, 1820, 1720, and even 1620. When we think about what's going on as far as the racial and xenophobic rhetoric that is being perpetuated in our social, political, economic, and racial climates, is very deep and it's pervasive. And it starts at the top as far as the White House is concerned, seething through our congressional and legislative halls down to our state, local, county government, and into our business practices and into the church. So how can we really have some meaningful conversation and move to a place of reconciliation and have the deep truths that will help us to move beyond just talk and start engaging in action? How can we really talk to those persons in places that have benefited from the sins of their past institutions while making the claim they have not? How can we have conversation with people who claim there is no such thing as white privilege? Because I contend that the problem with the pursuit of racial justice and racial reconciliation is found in a preponderance of incidents where African-American men and women are disproportionately treated negatively in society based upon the color of our skin, when it comes to police brutality and killing, when it comes to criminal sentencing, and when it comes to the proliferation of what we call the prison industrial complex, where Black and brown bodies make up a wide majority of those who are incarcerated for minimal offenses in relation to white counterparts. We know, if you don't know, let me just share with you that racism is really a new world phenomenon. Racism or the color of one's skin was not really an issue in biblical antiquity. I'm not saying there wasn't oppression and discrimination in the Bible or in biblical antiquity, but it was not just based upon the color of skin, but it was culture and gender, and ethnicity, and religion, unfortunately. So we understand that the issue of race came into prominence during the 1400s and 1500s when the Atlantic slave trade was in its infancy. So here's where we are right now in 2020. We can have meaningful progress when it comes to confronting racism, doing the work of justice, and progressing toward reconciliation, because we lack a foundational historical framework to approach and dissect these terms. So when I say that the concept of race is a new world construct, it is because this concept of race has become the political, social, economic, and theological impetus of the most horrific form of slavery in world's history. It's epistemological constructs of race for which modernity and even post-modernity precepts have been developed for relational and social interactions. When I was at Duke, I had a wonderful opportunity to study with Dr. Willie Jennings, who's now at Yale Divinity School. He taught a class on Christian anthropology. He crafted a term called distorted relational imagination in his book, The Christian Imagination, Theologies and Origin of Race. And in that, he talks about how we cannot even be one in the church because we fail to have those hard conversations when it comes to race. I am afraid of people when they tell me they don't see color, because when you say you're colorblind, you're denying the very image that God has made me in. So the problem is not seeing color, but when you assign a negative sociological and dysfunctional anthropological stereotype to me based upon the color of my skin. So where do we find ourselves right now? This is where the church comes into being. I'm so glad that Dr. Boswell and Reverend Rabel and even Rabbi Schindler are with me. The misinterpretation based upon a distorted relational imagination perpetuated by a heretical theological framework that causes false interpreters of the Bible to say that God has ordained slavery, that God has made the white race superior because they're descendants of Shem, that God has cursed blacks because we're descendants of Ham. All of that is a bad interpretation of scripture. In fact, the misinterpretation of a distorted relational imagination, coupled with an erroneous biblical hermeneutic, has given rise to a dysfunctional theological framework in which an inept institution known as the American white church has produced an illegitimate child known as the black church, in which now that illegitimate child has become the prophetic voice of the nation and even the world itself. The first shall be last and the last shall be first. However, in 2020, because the black church, in its vain and insidious attempt to copy the white evangelical conservative charismatic church by imitating a prosperity gospel of health and wealth, name it, claim it, or individualistic salvation ethos that is void of making systemic changes, we have lost our prophetic capacity to critique society. So in our current age, the cries for racial justice is not even led by the church or the black church in particular, but it's called on by the street with people saying Black Lives Matter and those entities. So where do we find ourselves? Frantz Fanon said in his writings, Black Skin, White Mask, that the Negro enslaved by its inferiority and the white enslaved by his superiority alike behave in accordance to neurotic orientation. In other words, when we as blacks act like we are less than whites, it's irrational. And when whites act like they're better than blacks, it is illogical. So how do we get to the place where we talk about black ability, white fragility? Here it is, and then I'll shut up. What we got to understand is that we as blacks have just as much ability as white people. And we got to be willing to have those conversations, and white people got to stop being so afraid to enter into those conversations, because this is where we find ourselves. In today's culture and society, when someone black engages in protest, they're a thug. But when someone white goes down to the Capitol with guns strapped, they're considered to be exercising their Second Amendment right. When someone black runs from the police, they are shot in cold blood. But when someone white runs or shoots up a theater or shoots up a church, they're considered mentally disturbed, and they're taken to Burger King when they're captive. When someone black is caught with a dime weed a bag, they're going to jail for distribution. But now we got white people that are able to buy up weed shops and become entrepreneurs based upon that. So we find ourselves really dealing with some systemic as well as individual shifts that we have to make. This is why we have termed this thing tonight, Black ability, white fragility. Let's have the conversation, and let's see God really do some good work of reconciliation.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. Thank you for that prophetic opening there. So at this time, we'll get started. I'm asking that my brothers and sisters from St. Paul, please come in and join me. So thank you again, Dr. Scott. I want to jump in this first question. I love asking this question. I'm excited to ask you this question. We understand that race is a social construct. However, racism is real. With that understanding, what do you love about being Black?
Can I jump in there? I love, one of the things that I love about being Black is our ability to make something beautiful out of nothing. I mean, scraps of cloth become a quilted mosaic, a jazz solo, a gospel moan, poetry. We can turn what other people throw away into a culinary delight. You know, just the way that we turn a phrase, and just the diversity in our skin tones. I mean, I could go on and on, but I think that that we just make Black people just make everything look cool and is cool. And so Black is beautiful, and there's a lot to celebrate.
Yeah.
So I think I would echo that and also add in our resilience and our joy. Like, even in the midst of pain and struggle, there is still joy that is just centered around mostly through our faith, but just that Black joy is contagious and it's energetic. And I love that. And I think this might be a little bit different than what people might be thinking, but being raised with that twice as good mentality, I love Black excellence, you know, so where it's fueled from having to be twice as good in order to be able to have the same thing as white people may have, but having that and that level of excellence that Black people bring to even a dinner party or at work or wherever, I love it.
For me, my favorite thing about us being Black is that we've never let anyone define us. Society for centuries has tried to throw terms on us. They tried to define us as slaves. They try to define us as less than second-class citizens. But I mean, you can look back throughout our history. You have people like Frederick Douglass. You have people like Abdul Rahman, who thought himself back as royalty back in the motherland. And even today, they try to define us as thugs and criminals. And we don't allow it to happen. We define ourselves. And that's my favorite thing about being Black, is that no matter what society throws on us, we say, no, that's not what I am. That's not what we are. We make who we are.
Well, I think that for me, the interesting thing about being Black is that we've always faced intimidation, but we never let it stop us. They intimidated us with the whip. They couldn't break our spirits. They lynched our men. We kept on moving. They raped our women, but our women remained strong and overcame it. The Klan attacked us at night. We fought twice as hard when the sun came up. Jim and his crazy wife, Jane Crow, tried to keep us from voting, but we kept showing up at the polling place. All they did was use intimidation, but we took a negative and we made it a positive. Just as my wife said, they gave us straw, we gave them bricks. They gave us seed, we made some cottons. They gave us lemon, we made lemonade. They gave us sorrow, we wrote some songs. They gave us pain, we penned some poems. They gave us trouble, we got a testimony. They gave us blues, we gave them music. They gave us hell, and we shouted back, hallelujah, because we know that God's truth is marching on. Yeah. So being Black, I've been able to understand what that did not kill us, only made us stronger. That's what it means to be Black.
I love it. I love having a pastor that got some Gil Scott-Heron in his spirit. And right there, I was thinking like, Whitey on the Moon was coming through my mind for a moment. But, with that understanding, how do we maintain that love, maintain Black joy, balance that Black joy in the midst of opposition? How do we maintain that balance for ourselves? And I want to contextualize that a little bit. After the public execution of George Floyd, we followed that up with Juneteenth, something significant and important. So how do we maintain and keep that balance going?
I think it goes back to what, the similar things of what we love about being Black is that resilience. And so even though there's negativity there, we still center around the joy and the faith of who we are. And it doesn't mean that we're not in parallel, still fighting the fight, but we know that in order to survive, in order to maintain and sustain and to continue to grow the next generation, we do have to still center around that joy. And I also think too, as we think about some of the negative things that surround just being a Black person in the community, it's also being educated and aware to combat those things. We're not all monolithic. Everything is not negative about being Black. And so just because there is something that's happening doesn't mean that all the joy gets stripped away.
Yeah, I would piggyback on that just to say, that a lot of the things that we all talked about, those do come from a place of pain or oppression or neglect, but we've always been able to endure and to create and be innovative. And I think that because of the faith that most of us have, we know that the actions that we take and everything that we do have eternal consequences. And so I think that, we look at, what we do for the least of these. We take that strength, we take the strength and the fortitude from our ancestors, and we just channel that into fighting the good fight every day.
So Dr. Scott and Minister Josh, let me change it slightly for you here. As Black men, what is your outlet for maintaining, balancing your mental health in regards to these difficult situations that we experience, personally and just visually?
Yeah. Well, at least for me, one of the outlets that I have is being around a community of other Black brothers and sisters. I think one of the best things and one of the things that about the Black community is that we're such a tight-knit community. And a lot of us go through some of the similar depressions and even oppressions. The Black experience in this country is something that pretty much we all go through. And it's something that, there are challenges that are unique to us that we all understand. So for me, having an outlet and having like-minded people and people that really understand what it means to be Black and really understand what it means to deal with those pressures at work, deal with those pressures when you're just walking up and down the street and someone's clutching their purse because you pass by. That helps a lot. Just having friends that you can really be honest to.
For me personally, it starts with my wife putting up with me. No, I'm serious. because being a Black man in America and even being a pastor of a church it's a very interesting challenge. So my wife Pierre and her love, her romantic love that is undergirded by her unconditional love for me. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is being connected to, for me, a Black fraternity. From a sociological perspective, being a part of my fraternity. And when I talk about being part of Omega Psi Phi did not come into existence on its own. We are part of a chain that started with the Alphas. And so that lineage, because when we think about particularly Black Greek organizations, even though we have our own tribe, when push comes to shove, we all come together because we're all moving toward the same cause.
Yeah.
The other thing, and I would even put this after my wife and my family, the church, being a part of the church. And when you understand the church in its purest form, in its original intent, what God desired, the church becomes really that refilling station. And then having, for me, from a personal mental perspective, I go see a therapist. I go see a therapist once a month to drop some of that stuff off me. And my therapist lets me say whatever I feel like saying, and I know it ain't gonna go nowhere. So my therapist gives me that outlet. But it's those type of things working in tandem that helps me to maintain some sense of balance and gives me the ability to do the stuff that I do.
Yeah.
Sister Hatchett, is something you want to add on to it?
Yeah, I definitely want to echo the therapy. I know after it was Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and it was just overwhelming for me. I'm a mother of a 3-year-old Black boy. I have a Black husband. My father is Black. It was just so overwhelming to me. I had 3 emergency therapy sessions, and I'm not ashamed to say it, within 10 days. I was having nightmares. I was just waking up like just overwhelmed with the complexities of what to do, how to protect, how to be there for other people, but also to take care of myself. So huge proponent of therapy. But then second, as the 5th Black person, president of the Junior League of Charlotte, that service and turn it into action. So of course, the family and church, yes, but being a part of an organization, I'm also in a sorority, but being a part of the Junior League of Charlotte, where I'm able to serve our community, it makes me feel like I'm helping.
Thank you for that. At this time, I want to bring in our white allies and co-conspirators to this conversation. Yeah, I like calling you co-conspirators as opposed to allies. You know, ally can just get a pat on the back anyway. I need someone to get in these streets with me. So, co-conspirators feels a little more invitational with that. So I'll go ahead and start with Reverend Rabel, and there it is, Dr. Ben Boswell. My first question here is, have you ever been ashamed to be white?
It's interesting that you asked the question, what do you love about being Black? And there are real markers of culture and pride and joy that are deeply rooted and held in the tension of deep suffering and trauma. And I'm aware of that. I'm more aware of that now than I used to be. Yes, I've felt ashamed of being white because I'm complicit in the role of racism and whiteness and the impact it's had on our country and in our city and in my church and in my family. Being white is about my kid going for a run in the neighborhood and not thinking twice about it, or my husband driving back and forth to work and never having to worry about being pulled over for his taillight that's out or his expired plate, And so, yes, there's shame in that. And I think that shame is undergirding about 400 years or so of real issues that it's time for us to come to terms with.
Anyone else care to share on that question?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Yeah, absolutely ashamed of being white often throughout my life, and more so as I grow older. And I want to distinguish shame of it, or the guilt of it, from being born white, which of course I didn't do anything to be born white. I didn't ask to be born white, right? So I'm not ashamed that I was born white. I'm ashamed of what I participate in by being white. I'm ashamed of whiteness itself and the ways in which I have been formed in whiteness and taught how to be white, and then made the moral choice to be white over and over again, and only have come late in life now to learn about whiteness as an anti-Black epistemology of domination and control, and to begin to try to discover what it might mean to divest myself from whiteness and to abdicate from the power and the economic and political power and advantage that it gives to me. And to find ways to not let shame and guilt be a thing that shuts me down, but prompts me into action.
Thank you. Let me kind of pivot here a little bit. How would you describe privilege? Anyone here?
It's advantages that we're given, and white privileges are advantages that we are given at the expense of others because of the color of our skin. And when I think about those advantages and the ways in which the advantages those of us who are white have received at the expense of those who have darker skin, that is what pains me and actually physically sickens me. And so when I share the mic day was a couple weeks ago, where you shared your social media with someone else. So I gave my social media to Reverend Amantha Barbie for the day. So she just had it for 24 hours. She still has my passcodes and can post anything she wants. But the first thing someone posted is, well, when will these Black women stand up for Jewish women? Like, immediately people went to places that embarrassed me. So that was, they don't understand that because of our experience with anti-Semitism, we need to stand up for those who are victims of racism. That's number one. And number two, when I think about the history of the soil, I'm at Queen's University, and we know it was built prior to the Civil War, and it's got a history where, whites, those who are African-American, couldn't buy property in that neighborhood. That's really hard for me to get beyond. The soil, I'm very aware of the soil on which I stand, and do everything to bring equity and justice to that university.
If I can too, I think, also just add into that, good to see you guys too. I know I missed y'all on Thursday due to some Hebrew class there, but I think for this this privilege was something that I know I've been confronted with, honestly, for a while, but really have been more open to recently. I think especially being involved at St. Paul and being, the children and youth pastor, at a predominantly African-American church where, these issues are coming, right there, and you're hitting the face with it, and rightfully so. And I think where privilege has really hit me, and this is where, and I really want to share, honestly, this article at some point, Ms. Deb, I'll probably send it to you, but it describes what kind of white privilege really is. It's a Tolerance magazine that kind of goes into detail about it. And there's a power that it talks about, like the power of the benefit of the doubt, that really hit me. And really that can be seen with racial profiling, but also with being pulled over. When I consider the amount of parents in my children and youth ministries here at the church that have to have the conversation, with their children, but especially their young black sons, that they need to understand what they need to do to save their life when they get pulled over. And then I'm over here, and my parents might have had that discussion about, hey, respect police officers, but it was never, hey, you need to fear for your life, and how can you keep that from happening? And so I think for me, that benefit of the doubt, being given to me there, where the biggest thing I'm worried about is getting a speeding ticket, and my Black brothers and sisters are worried about losing their life during these stops. And so I think for me, that's where it's really hit me in terms of white privilege. So
thank you, Reverend Patency. That's a great pivot right there for me in the next question. For those of you with children, how do you nurture or cultivate an understanding of privilege with your children, or the power or danger of privilege?
I'm happy to speak to that. I think nurture is a dangerous word for white people who are trying to raise young people to be anti-racist and anti-oppressive. And it's something that as a parent, I've had to work intentionally on because my instinct in my whiteness, if I'm not being intentional, is to protect and nurture my children. To the point as a Christian person, I remember when my child was very young, not wanting to tell her about the nails in Jesus's wrist. I felt like I could avoid telling her about the sacrifice and pain that Jesus suffered on her behalf. And so now we watch videos. My children watch the video of the killing and the knee on the throat. And I make intentional choices to have my children in relationships with a diverse array of friendships and with people to help me keep myself honest in that work.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to follow right in that. Yeah, I mean, everything Laurie said is deeply powerful and moving to me, especially the question about the nails. I think whiteness is something that is a formation. That's how Dr. Jennings describes it, is something we're formed in. And we're formed in it before we know what it is. And then once we know what it is, then we make moral choices to continue to participate in it. So the moral formation that's happening, it's happening when we're children. And we don't realize it because whiteness goes unmarked and it goes hidden behind the scenes. It's seen as normative and dominant. And so you can go through your life never having to imagine you have a race if you're white. So I think it's important for white parents to nurture their children to help them understand that they're white and what whiteness is and how to begin even at an early age, how to be anti-racist. I think about Ibram Kendi's new book about anti-racist baby and some of that work and how we're trying to get white parent groups at Myers Park Baptist. And I know Laurie and Judy are doing this kind of thing as well to get these groups together to try to reframe their parenting, totally reframe their parenting around an anti-racist lens. Personally, for me, I am the father of an adopted Black daughter. So that changes my conversations a lot. And talking to her, I have to have the same kind of talk, but different for her because she's being raised in predominantly white environments. And so for instance, a conversation with her about how she and her white best friend might go do something together and get in trouble and think that it's going to be equal, but that she's going to get punished worse and that she's in more danger. And she's 10. So trying to explain that to a 10-year-old who does not see the world in terms of racial oppression, 400 years of racial oppression, struggle. Why would I get in more trouble? Why? And so that's the work, and making sure that she always, I love the conversation about what do you love about being Black. That's my constant conversation with her, is about what do you love about yourself, and trying to continue to empower that Black love and Black joy in her.
Thank you.
And let me just interject, because I think that where we find ourselves really struggling as far as color of one's skin, giving one the benefit of the doubt, and I think Peyton raises so aptly. When you hear people talk about, I don't see color, or I'm colorblind, y'all got to excuse my French. I tell them, you're a damn lie. You do see color, and you make certain assumptions based upon color. So I really want whoever, whenever you see me, if a white person see me, that you move beyond just looking at the color of my skin and bringing your negative stereotypes from an anthropological perspective, and help me, not help me, but allow me to be who God has created for me to be. So here's what I want us to understand. I ain't got an issue with the color of your skin. Care less about the color of your skin. My thing is that don't allow for the color of your skin to become the superiority ethos that you think you're better than me, as I have to try to lift my people to understand that the color of our skin does not make us less than. God created us to be Black. God created us to be white. God created us to be Asian. God created us to be Native American. Whatever the color of our skin, that's part of God's image in us. And we got to raise that and stop weaponizing Black bodies. The interesting thing, and I want to throw this out, I'm not a NASCAR fan. Nothing impresses me about a car going around in circles and circles for 600 miles. It really doesn't. But here's where benefit of the doubt comes in, Peyton. Bubba Wallace had those NASCAR drivers surround him because they thought they found a noose in his garage. For me, that was one of the best expressions of people rallying to him. Now, it wasn't a noose. Now I'm getting ready to go somewhere with this. It wasn't a noose. Hallelujah. But now we have the skeptics who want to say it was a hoax. So Bubba's not given the benefit of the doubt.
That's right.
No. Okay. Bubba's not given the benefit of the doubt. But now I'm getting ready to say something that from a sports analogy that just blesses me. NASCAR did more for Bubba Wallace than the NFL did for Colin Kaepernick. Let me say that again. NASCAR, with all them white folks
and Confederate flags
did more for Bubba than the NFL did for Colin Kaepernick.
Yeah.
We have no excuses, right? If NASCAR can do it, then any one of us can do it.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi. Speak, Rabbi.
Now, I want to, my kids are 18 and 20. So I saw this question. I just went in and asked them, now, when did you learn about white privilege? And, when were you aware of systemic racism? Because, they've always been surrounded by, extended Black family. And my kids are great dancers, my older one, because they were taught that love of family gathering. And when you all talked about what you love about being Black, my kids love that because they got to experience it. And I think that's one way, is to really make sure we have very broad circles. I am embarrassed by so many white people who don't have any Black friends with whom to have this conversation and connection. So there's so much beauty in Jewish culture, in Christian culture, in Black culture, and we have to experience that and appreciate that. My kids were at the protests with me every time. If I say, you want to go uptown, they're right there with me. I have to keep them from getting arrested at protests. And that's another conversation, to teach them the value of non-violent protest.
Let me throw this question in there, and this will be my last question. Then I want to switch to the other group again. What do you think the role of our white allies is with dismantling racism and confronting white supremacy? And let me give this caveat to it. I'm tired of talking to white people about race and racism, and I really don't believe it's my demon to kill. I believe that is so. That's a little context here.
Yeah, I want to jump on that because I think it's our job. I mean, we got to do our work. And that means that white clergy, white leaders of every institution, white nonprofit directors, white CEOs of major corporations have to decide that it is their work to dismantle whiteness and dismantle systemic racism and white supremacy. And so we have to be the ones that do the work of talking to and training, doing anti-racist trainings with our white congregants, our white board members, our white workers in our organizations. And as James Baldwin says, white people are trapped in a history they don't understand, and until they can understand it, they can't be released from it. So we're slaves to our own superiority, as Dr. Scott has mentioned already. And that's, if we don't look at it, we have to spend the time looking at the history of whiteness and its oppressive and terrorizing legacy. It's not going to be fun, but until we understand it, we don't understand ourselves. And we're a danger to the whole world if we don't understand ourselves. And so that's where it starts.
I think it's twofold. Everything Ben just said, and then we need to have the chutzpah to put our money where our mouth is. Like, I'm sick of talking. I mean, I'm never gonna be sick of talking about it because I need to keep talking about it. But until we start actually making real change with the access and privilege that we have, and still we start using our bodies in ways that create space and safety for our siblings who are Black and brown to do the work and say what they need to say too, put our money where we can, then to me, it's just, we have a really bad track record. It is like 400 years of not walking the walk. Like every now, I mean, and so I don't trust us, but I'm in it, you know. So I'm hopeful.
And now is the time, is what I'd say. I feel like, you know, we had the civil rights era, right? We had, you know, the abolitionists, we have the civil rights era, and this is called America's racial reckoning. And we need to make tremendous advances right now. We need to work as hard as we can, you know, 18 hours a day to organize and advocate and transform systems one by one, from policing to healthcare to education to land ownership and home ownership and business, and we need to accelerate upward mobility. So I invite everyone who's listening to this right now to join in organizing and building that power to make the change that so desperately needs to happen.
Yeah, I like that a lot. If I can just go ahead and say that too, I think that what Laurie said too about, you know, really moving past the point of privilege. I think to be able to speak out against these things, I think so many times, you know, silence has been, you know, even my response in some of these areas. And really, when you finally understand, I think it's, you know, start shouting from the rooftops, really, you know, some of these injustices that are happening, because, you know, I know MLK is so often quoted, but one of my favorite quotes by him is, you know, the mutuality that he talks about when he says an injustice one place is injustice everywhere. You know, you have to take it upon yourself to realize, you know, we're a part of this together. We're in this together. This is a team effort. And you know, until we start speaking up, you know, and moving past that for injustices that are taking place for our Black brothers and sisters, then, I mean, the word doesn't even get out and people don't even hear about these experiences. So definitely a part of that.
And I want to say that everything you all have said is so on point, but I got 4 things that really need to happen. The first one is there needs to be authentic repentance.
Yeah.
And repentance means that you make a complete change. It's a change of your mind and your heart. And that's a word that many people don't want to hear. You got to have authentic repentance. When your mind is changed, your intentions will change. When your mind is changed, your beliefs will change. When your mind is changed, your behavior will change. Not only must there be authentic repentance, but then you got to have apparent restitution. And so this got to be the center of justice and repentance. If you say, I'm sorry, but do nothing to fix the situation and make sure it doesn't happen again, then your apology is vacuous. It's empty. It's fake. Yeah. And so I'm going to throw out a word that's going to be a bomb, but there has to be some form of reparation.
I agree.
And when you look at the Bible, you think about this guy named Zacchaeus. And when Jesus said, Zacchaeus, I'm going to eat at your house. And Zacchaeus said, listen, Lord, if I've done anything wrong, I'm going to pay back 4-fold what I took from folks. That's reparations. Mm-hmm. That's restitution. Yeah. Last thing we as Black folks need is another apology. Apologizing for slavery ain't justice. Apologizing for lynching ain't justice. Apologizing for raping our women ain't justice. Apologizing for last hire, first fire ain't justice. Apologizing for the deaths of all of those who have died at the hand of police brutality or white racism. That is not justice. Mm. And then we need to have absolute forgiveness. And forgiveness does not mean I forget. Forgiveness is not a nonchalant discharge of the wrongs done by letting bygones be bygones. But it has to be connected to justice. And biblical forgiveness means that you right the wrong that has been done. I want to suggest that when I look at Jesus and his humanity, when he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they want to do, this is my interpretation. Jesus is saying in his humanity, God, I really lack the human capacity to do this. So I need you, God, to forgive and empower me to do what you have called me to do. So I want to abandon the purpose you have for me on this cross. So God, you forgive them, because right now I cannot until you allow for me to bring to fruition the purpose you have called for me to do. So I can embrace and walk in that purpose and see you do your thing. Mm-hmm. And then when that happens, you got reconciliation that takes place, because justice, the requirements have been met. Sin separates us from God and it separates us from each other. And all of us were created to be in association with God and with one another. So that has to be driven, that reconciliation has to be driven by what we call an agape, unconditional spiritual love that is based upon our relationship with God, that then impacts all the other relationships that we have as far as life is concerned.
I hear you. I feel like oftentimes we're stuck in denial.
Yeah.
Like we're a lot more Peter and Judas and like and a lot of Jesus.
Yeah.
We're not there collectively. That we're in the state of denial.
Yeah, I totally agree.
We can't get to repentance because we don't really mean it yet.
Yeah, it makes me think about one of my favorite Cornel West quotes. Love is what justice looks like in public. I'm always love that quote. I'm going to ask for the other group to come back in now. I have a few questions, follow up to this segment here. But I'll go ahead and get started with Dr. Scott here. My next question here is, when was the first time you had the talk? And someone had to give you the talk?
I grew up in a little town called Monticello, Mississippi. And can I tell you what I love about Mississippi, even though folks consider it to be the most racist state in the country?
Yes, sir.
What I love about Mississippi is that at least you knew who the racists were.
Okay.
You didn't have to, there was no pretense. You knew who liked you and who didn't. You knew where folks stood. So I didn't have to have the talk because, it was right there in front of me. I listen, I can deal with so-and-so because I knew exactly where he or she stood and I could come at you and deal with you and flow as far as that's concerned. Pierre has started beginning to have conversations with Charis about some distinctions that she is from the little white girl she go to school with. And I don't have a son, but I have sons in ministry and in life as far as my ministry is concerned that are younger, that I always have to remind them, listen, you can't do ABC because if you do ABC, EFG is going to happen.
Oh, yes. Someone else care to respond to that one?
So I would say it kind of goes back to my comments earlier about the twice as good mentality. I'm not so sure I can pinpoint my parents sitting me down and saying, hey, you're a Black girl and here's how you need to engage. I feel like it was just a part of our upbringing. Like it was maybe not as overt, but I knew that I was different. I knew I was held to a different standard that was definitely expressed in our home. Not necessarily, and I'm obviously not a Black male, so not necessarily as it relates to the police, but similar to the conversations you're having with your daughter about here's the difference, here's how you have to interact. You can't afford to fail. You have to make an A+. A is not good enough because you got to just keep being the best in order to just get the average of everybody else around you. And I just feel like that was just a part of the part of the upbringing.
I just want to, I'm not dismissing that. I just want to push back on that a little. I heard you say although I'm not a Black male, and I just want to acknowledge that many of our sisters are experiencing the same, but the numbers, there's an intentionality of not always showing the percentage of Black women that are being harassed and killed by law enforcement. I just want to throw that out there because I often hear that I'm not a Black male, so I don't understand, but that context is more aligned than we give credit for.
I accept the challenge, and I'm going to say Breonna Taylor's name because we still need justice for Breonna. But I think as we think about parenting in the Black household, there are certain conversations that you have, probably all households have it, but I can only speak for my own upbringing, with your sons related to probably the police. For us, it was more about protection, making sure nobody was going to try to molest us, and how do we interact with family members and men at church. And like, it was much more about that than it was about interacting with police. And maybe that's part of the problem, is that we have to realize that when you're Black, you don't get the benefit of being a gender. You're just Black.
Gotcha. Yeah, let me throw this one out there. For those that feel, open or bold enough, if you have had a negative encounter with law enforcement, would you mind sharing? How did that?
I can start on that one. I've had a couple actually, but the most recent one was, for those you don't know, I work at Bank of America in the Tower in Uptown, and I live around the corner. So I walk to and from my apartment. So one day after work, it was late. I was walking home, and you wear a tie every day to work. Walking home, I realized I left my wallet at the office. So when I get home, I'm trying to buy some food. I'm like, darn, I have to go back. So I don't think anything of it. I'm in a hoodie and some sweats. I just walk back right to the office, and the officer stops me and is like, sir, you're not supposed to be here. What are you doing here? And I'm kind of looking at him like, Sir, it's a public place, number one. People walking all the time. Number two, I work here. I have to pull out my badge and say, sir, I work here. You know, I go into the office. But that was the most earlier this year. I think end of 2019. But I mean, that type of stuff happens. I mean, I don't think he meant any ill will by it, but it was his prejudice. It was already his bias that he already has, implicit bias that he already had. And if I'm just afraid, and it made me wonder, like, what if he actually had ill will toward me? You know, just because of the color of my skin.
So, Josh, in that moment, what is your protocol for something negative like that happens? Have you established one for yourself, or has someone else given you one for moments like that?
Yeah. So two things. Number one, my parents have always told me, make sure you're always overly nice. Make sure you always overdo it to make sure that you are the most respectful, nice person, because I'm a large black man. And when if you don't know me, what you see is a large black man. You don't see a lover of Christ. What you see is a 6'7", 240-pound black man. And, you know, that's what you see. And a young black man at that. So for me, the protocol is always communicate, be nice, smile, try to disarm in any way that you can, just because of the society and the world that we live in.
Thank you, Josh. Josh, last one, I'll leave you alone. Do you have your parents' phone number memorized? Because I'm convinced that millennials don't know phone numbers.
I have it memorized. They made sure, my mama, she gave us training to make sure that, it's actually kind of funny to bring that up. One of the things that they have us do anytime we get pulled over, just literally every time, is I'm of the millennial generation, so I've been driving since I was 15 and I had an iPhone. Anytime you get pulled over, FaceTime it.
My bad, Gen Z, my bad. So for everyone here, my next question is, have you had white peers deny the ideal of white supremacy or white privilege? And how did you confront that situation? White peers, someone in your congregation, your family, how did you confront that situation?
Well, I'll take that one. I think that the term white supremacy really hangs people up because they, most of the time when you use that term, people think of, you know, bombing black churches or Ruby Bridges in the 60s or blood and soil in Charlottesville or something like that. And I think that while it certainly applies to those groups, I think that to me, it really goes deeper. And so I think if, you know, I try not to get hung up on the semantics of things, but really look at it as, you know, what I try to tell and explain and get across to some of my white friends is that if there is an all white anything, whether it's your school, country club, your church, whatever it is, or neighborhood, when you go into it, you assume that that's the way that it's supposed to be. You know, that it's normalized, that there are all white spaces. And I think when we're in those all white spaces, it's incumbent upon our white friends to look around and say, you know, why are there no people of color on this board or teaching in the classroom or wherever that space is, and to really make note of that and start watching and noticing it. And I think that in the conversations that we're having, people are starting to see those things and point them out.
I would dare say, and I want to hear my other colleagues speak on this afterwards. In religious circles, it's really kind of hard to have these conversations. So a couple of weeks ago, well, several days ago, a well-known charismatic evangelical pastor by the name of Rod Parsley out of Ohio said that basically we as blacks need to get over slavery. You know, it happened a long time ago. We need to get over it, da, 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 da. And a whole lot of black folks go to his church. Okay. The other one is a guy named Lou Giglio out of Atlanta, Passion City Church. When, bless his heart, he said, you know, the term white privilege kind of throws some folks off, like white supremacy here. Said instead of saying white privilege, maybe we need to say white blessings. And I'm not saying that slavery was good, but you know, there were some blessings that about, and I wanted to cuss him out. I was like, dude, Have you lost your ever-loving mind? And those two wind up apologizing. And then the wonderful angel of expository preaching by the name of John MacArthur basically called Black Lives Matter a movement of the devil, and just really, talked about that. So in our religious circles, these apologies don't mean a thing anymore, because they are spoken out of a position of privilege and a white supremacist theology that continues to be perpetuated until we call it out.
I want to navigate here for a little while, so please others chime in here.
Okay, I like to distinguish between white supremacy, maybe with a capital W, capital S would be the Ku Klux Klan, and white supremacy with a lowercase WS is the false narrative of a hierarchy of human value based on the color of one's skin. That has been perpetuated from the beginning of this country, and so America. And so I help people understand that we're not talking about individual racist behavior. We're talking about structural racism. If we sent all the bigots up to the moon, we still would have racism in this country, because that is the structure on which our country was built, right? We displaced indigenous people from their land, stole it from them, and then we brought over slaves, and then we had the Jim Crow South and mass incarceration. The other thing that's really important to me, in Charlottesville, when they said blood and soil, that was a Nazi chant, right? Blood and soil is a Nazi chant. It meant this land is for Aryans and this soil belongs to us. And Hitler's goal was to make Europe Jew-free for 1,000 years, right? So that blood and soil is the same chant in Charlottesville. It is sickening, it is offensive, and many people fall on that hierarchy. So I think, Jews only became white after World War II, right? We were considered not white before that. Right. And we have to understand what becoming white brought us, and how it pushed us forward. And we need to remember that experience. Today, Jews are petrified of anti-Semitism. And I think that prevents Jews from getting out there. They're so afraid of it. And so they're afraid of anti-Semitism on the streets today. Kids are afraid to share they're Jewish at summer camp. So we're traumatized, and it's really hard to get Jews past that. And they remember marching in the 60s. We had Rabbi Heschel marching with Martin Luther King. They said, oh, we did it. We've always stood by blacks. And we can't rest on our laurels of the 60s. We got to be out there today. So I think, we have to get over ourselves and build those strong bridges. And I would hope our African-American siblings would understand some of the real trauma. I was named for my great aunt Judy, who was murdered at 32 with her husband, who was 34, and their 5 kids from 10 to 2 were all shot together. So her name was Judy Schindler. So we do have some trauma. It doesn't excuse anything, but it prevents us sometimes from being at the table as we should.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think for white Christians, and I'm not just talking about white evangelicals, I think white theology is bankrupt because it is almost completely intertwined with the idea of whiteness. So Christianity and whiteness have been sewn together in the American fabric. So any theology born on this soil, it has been sewn together with whiteness. And so Christians, white Christians, or those racialized as white, have to do the work of disentangling whiteness from Christianity. And most of the time, the best place to learn that is from Black liberation theologians who have been trying to do this work for hundreds of years now, really. And so I think that's the first thing, is that's why it's so hard in the white church to talk about this, is because theology and Christianity itself has been intertwined with whiteness so closely that it's almost impossible to distinguish the two from each other. And so that's why you get this defensiveness, back to Laurie's conversation about denial. You get this idea of denial that all white folks are in about the history of whiteness, and they get defensive when you bring up the language of white privilege, or and that defensiveness turns into, well, I was raised poor in the mountains of North Carolina, and so don't tell me my people have privilege. When I go back there, I see my folks, they can barely help feed themselves. So you live in the urban environment. So So they want to make an economic move, right? But they want to make the economic move to divorce themselves from having to deal with their. So I say, yes, let's make the economic move, but let's talk about racial capitalism, and let's talk about the intertwining of race and class together, and how poor white folks are race is constantly used to divide poor white folks from poor black folks who have economic solidarity with each other. And what would it look like if they came together? And so I think there's these, and then the tropes just keep coming in the white church. Laurie can just tell you, the next one is that, when they hear about Black Lives Matter, then they want to say, well, what about black on black crime? And what Ibram Kendi has taught me, or what I've been learned from reading him, is that the constant move of white folks, particularly white Christians, is to imagine something's wrong in the black community that caused racism, that something's wrong with black people. And I just want to say that, no, something's wrong with white people. Right. That's why we have this problem, because white people have something wrong, and it's called whiteness that we don't know what to do with. And we keep perpetuating systems of oppression over and over again. And it's not because there was ever anything wrong in the black community or with black people, but something wrong in our hearts that we have to, and that we created these systems, and we have to do something about those systems.
Thank you, Dr. Boswell. I want to bring in Reverend Rabel here.
I will just add to that in this particular time in history over the last several years, I feel like on top of everything that Dr. Boswell just stated is now an additional layer of fear and paralysis due to the bifurcated nature of politics that a lot of majority white congregations really are wrestling with, because they either don't want to offend each other, or they don't want to come to terms with what they're really voting for, which is their money, which to leadership that's afraid to preach the truth of the gospel, which is do justice, love mercy, walk humbly, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so these words like justice and peace and equity, which are biblical words, have become politicized to the point where leaders in congregations are completely complicit in our silence. So it's everything Dr. Boswell said, and then all of the fear that's been created here in these last few years. If I'm being honest.
This is the place for it. Reverend C.
Man, I was kind of waiting for this question. This question was really sticking out to me when it was on the paper, because the amount of pushback that I got from family and friends, and I won't name specific names on this video because that's not my place to do that, nor is it the spot to do it. But in terms of the interactions, I will gladly speak to them. Because the amount of pushback that I got for going to a predominantly African-American church and becoming their white children and youth pastor was absolutely it was just mind-blowing. It brought out people's true colors in my family and my friends, and mostly because it centered around a lot of the whiteness that I know you, Reverend Laurie, talked about, and you, Dr. Boswell, I know with, especially that intertwining of whiteness and Christianity, and really being scared of what's different as well. Going to St. Paul, I know several relatives were worried about the way that Black pastors preach, the way that the choir sings is different. Yeah. Oh my gosh, you're just not going to come back. You're not going to come back the same person. And you know what? They were right. I am not going to come back the same person, because I have been, intermeshed with at St. Paul has just been incredible. And what I want to speak to is in the fact, I want to give my sister a shout out, because my sister has definitely dated Black guys and has wanted to date Black guys. And there have been family members that have tried to say that is not okay, and that God speaks out against interracial marriage, and especially in regards to the Tower of Babel and how he separated the different nations, not realizing that passage was actually meant to say that, okay, these people are trying to build an idol for themselves, and that's why God separated them. And personally, I just didn't care, because if he loved Jesus and he treated my sister right, that was perfectly fine for me. And so It's amazing the prejudice that is involved in, I think, one of the ways that is broken, and one thing that I wish that older generations in my family and the friends that I know would take on is that experience is so vital in these areas. When you actually just immerse yourself into an environment or with friends of a different culture, of a different race, and obviously right now, especially with the Black culture and Black race, is that it is incredible to just be able to put yourself in the other person's shoes and actually try to see what it is that you can learn from them. And I continue to pray that over them, and I continue to try to shut it down as much as I can. But I hope God continues to keep me in this environment to show them that, one thing, Pastor, that you're amazing, because I know I bragged on you any chance that I get, but just being able to show them that, man, this is beautiful, and it just shows the diversity in God's kingdom.
Let me just interject before we bring in Sister Hatch. The Black church, we are not, well, let me say St. Paul. St. Paul, we are not, for the most part, we're not 100% perfect in this area either. By virtue of the fact that when I brought on Peyton, I had some people in the church going like, why are you bringing on that white boy to be the youth and children pastor? He don't know nothing about Black culture. And I had to set some folks, not down, but I had to put some folks in their place. Because when I first met Peyton, oh my God, I didn't realize he was white. So when I first met Peyton, yeah, I knew he was a white brother going to Gardner Webb, but when I met him, something about our spirits just clicked. And I was more than honored to extend to him this opportunity, because from a prayerful spiritual perspective, he fit what I was looking for. And my God, I mean, when we brought him on, there were some people who were looking at both of us kind of crazy. But the more Peyton worked and he does the work, the more folks were like, oh, wow, Pastor, you know, that was a great choice. So we are being blessed by his presence as well as he being blessed by ours. So I want to say that, because we as Blacks in the church got work to do as well.
Yeah, other than who you cheer for in football, Peyton, you're all right with me.
Yeah, I want to see what Shalita has to say as far as this conversation.
Yeah, Sister Hatch. Excuse me.
Yep, I would say that, you know, to me, when I think about having conversations with, you know, white people as it relates to the Black experience in America, the most hurtful thing is the dismissive part of, well, you know, Black people just need to work harder. You know, Black people have the same opportunities. You know, I've had to struggle. Nobody paid for me to do this. And you're having the conversations in your church, whatever it is. Yes, but you did not lose an opportunity or not have access because of your skin color. No one is dismissing the struggle. And I just wanted to echo what you were saying, Dr. B, about it's hurtful, because there is so much work in the twice as good. I keep saying that theme, and for it to be dismissed, like I just showed up here, or it's affirmative action, or it's time for another Black person. It is absolutely hurtful. The other thing I will say is the unawareness or lack of just breadth of what's happening in the world has really been eye-opening to me. All of these troubles were happening in the Black community. They have been going on. Things didn't just bubble up. This has been the Black experience. And, you know, I think about Black mothers worrying about their children coming home in slavery. It's still happening with a different master at the hand. And to be able to have the privilege to not even be aware that it's happening, and the conversations has really been kind of mind-blowing. And the last thing I'll say is, there's a hurtfulness of being dismissed from your experience of being a Black person and knowing that race is playing a part in how people are treating you and responding to you, especially when you become a Black person of authority. But then when you are also sectioned out to be a different kind of Black. So it's only Black thugs that have this issue, or Black people who have parents that don't love them. And it's like, you know, I was having a conversation with one of my white friends and saying, if my son gets pulled over, nobody's going to say, who's your mom? Did you go to college? How much money do your parents make? He's just a Black dude that is going to be a big Black dude that got pulled over. And so to have people say, like, you're different, it's also hurtful too.
one of the things that Sister Hatch brings up is, and I've talked with Laurie about this before on another call, is the emotional place that white people are in relationship to the Black experience is so opposite that we can almost not even fathom. So whites are in constant denial about being white, and Blacks are being constantly traumatized for being Black in America. And so it's constant denial versus constant trauma, and denial and trauma don't talk.
Well, and then we center white emotions and feelings and fragility at the expense of the person who's traumatized because we're uncomfortable.
So, Dr. and Laurie, let me ask you this question. So I've been processing and thinking about why now for white people? This moment and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, the moment seems drastically different. We're seeing on social media more white people step up and they're at marches and protests. This has always been going on. Why now, in your opinion?
I feel like the polarization in our country politically. B, white people who generally have not been forced to feel vulnerable or at risk, who have been impacted by COVID-19. C, our siblings who are Black and brown who have been really impacted by COVID-19 in ways that white people have not. And then the ongoing racial trauma and police brutality that's happened, that's been really the catalyst of George Floyd's death, has really put us in a situation where we've got a video. We need to watch it more than once, and we cannot deny what we see in that video in that particular time, at this particular time and space. That's why I think this is happening right now.
Yeah, I want to follow up with Laurie on that. I agree for sure with COVID. That has to be a huge factor right now because I think also economically, so many Americans not having jobs, so many people out of a job because of COVID. So the economic problems that lead to looking at the situation that they're in differently. And then I would also just add that I think, and this is just something in looking at fragility as being sometimes a positive. I don't think fragility, white fragility, unless it's centered and takes over the conversation, if it can just come up and we can work through it, it can be a catalyst for transformative growth, because emotional vulnerability can also open us up to transformative growth. And one of the things in some work that I've done on white fragility, one of the emotions I was most surprised by that white people have when it comes to talking about race is disgust. And not disgust the way you would think about it, but disgust with themselves. When they see whiteness, they are disgusted about it and then disgusted with themselves. And disgust is an extremely powerful emotion. And when you see that white police officer's knee on George Floyd's neck and you're not disgusted, then you've got something wrong with your humanity. And so I think so many white folks saw that. And I think they also see who's in the highest office and they're disgusted by that. And they're disgusted by the police officer with his knee on the neck. And they're tired of being disgusted with themselves. And they finally have some humanity come up and decide, I'm going out in the street. Something's got to change.
Thank you.
I can just invoke a Dr. King quote right here. One of the things he said when asking what his strategy was at Selma is he said that his goal was to wake up the white consciousness of America. Mm-hmm. And that's why he wanted news reporters there. That's why he wasn't opposed to when they brought out the hoses and the dogs. Because the only way that the Black struggle can continue is you have to have the white consciousness of this country be awoken to the struggles. And our white brothers and sisters don't only have to be allies, they have to walk alongside with us and push these changes forward.
I would recommend Holy Envy, really talking as whites about what we love and admire about our Black colleagues and friends and family. I admire the strength of the Black mother. I was adopted by my friend's mother on her deathbed and was completely honored. So I admire Black women's strength. I think we need holy shame, that we acknowledge the shame of our past and the shame of the wealth we have accrued as African Americans have been pushed further and further and further behind. We need to admire holy anger, the holy anger of our Black siblings and support it and amplify it. We need holy repentance that says, I'm sorry, we did wrong. We need to acknowledge it. We need to restore it with financial, I'm calling for a $100 million fund run by the Black community to the Black community to accelerate upward mobility in the areas of harm that have been done: faith, education, healthcare, criminal justice, mental health, and business. And then we need holy leadership. And that means we do not drive the car, right? You all need to drive the car, and we need to give you that power, empower you to lead as we stand behind you.
I love that. I am applauding. And let me just say this, that I also love that you're calling us siblings. I love that. I'm going to start using that myself. Something that we can all do. And I know you haven't asked this question yet, but in terms of just, getting to where people can go with this, I think it's just, we all have to just educate ourselves about whatever the disparities are in our community. Follow your passion. If your passion is education, then you can financially support an HBCU or there are thousands of organizations. Pick one. If you're you support Black-owned businesses. If you're a realtor, don't assume that white people only want to live in this neighborhood and that Black people only want to live or deserve to live in this neighborhood. If you're a hiring manager, you can make sure that you don't look at a person's name and say, oh, I think that might be a Black person, or that name sounds kind of ethnic. Or when they come in for the interview, make sure that that you're not dismissing people because, well, I don't think they'll fit in here. I think that wherever we are, whatever our vocation, there's something for all of us to do. If there's only a couple of teachers of color at your kid's school, find out why. Where are they doing their recruiting? So I think I'm hopeful that when we're having these conversations, that the history that is taught in school will be more inclusive and that it will be from more than one point of view. And what I want to say to my parents is, when your kid comes home with a history lesson that is different from the one that you learned, don't freak out. Don't freak out. We adapted to new math, so we can adapt to this. I just want everybody to take a breath and really try to learn something, because I think that just the ongoing education and having the opportunity to learn and to grow, and that's really what diversity is all about, is listening to and hearing a lot of different voices and being able to be a better person tomorrow than you were today.
And I want to echo what Rabbi was saying. I was pregnant in 2016 when Keith Lamont Scott was shot. And I had two white women come up to me and apologize for bringing a Black son into this world. And so we think about the conversation earlier about the burden of being a Black mother. Is joy in that, but there's also a different burden. You pray different when you're bringing a Black son into this world. And it really gets me upset, because I'm thinking I'm supposed to be joyful. I'm supposed to be happy during this time. Now I'm worried. And am I being selfish for bringing him into the world? And then I start thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to look at him and say that I'm doing something different? And then I start thinking about all the moms before me that have lost their kids and have tried to do things. And so it is definitely a different type of a mothering that you do. You love differently, you raise differently, you pray differently, your village is different, because you want your kid to not just survive. We all want our kids to thrive. So I just have to get that out before.
So I'm gonna pivot with this question. So I've been thinking about Amy Cooper, the Central Park family, or whatever you want to call it. So is white fragility nurtured and taught, or is it, and how do we combat against it? And if given opportunity, what would you say to her?
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, I think white fragility is definitely taught. Oh, perhaps you can go.
Go ahead.
White fragility is taught. I mentioned earlier that whiteness is a form of moral formation that we receive very young without even knowing it. We hear our parents talk about other people in our homes as children. We see what they watch on television. We hear what the music that they listen to. We are formed in whiteness, and then we are also formed by their emotional reaction. We're formed by their emotional reaction to news stories as they watch the news. We're formed by their emotional reaction to the events in our world and what happens. Their reaction and relationships with people of color and others. So we're formed by their emotional reaction, and then we learn to emotionally react by mimicking our parents and others in our world that we see. And so I think, yes, it's taught. And then I think our society, which is, this cultural hegemony of white supremacy that is in our society, then reinforces those emotions over and over again through media, through news, through politics, through economics. And so, the emotional reactions, of course, are not surprising, but I think the thing that white people need to understand is that they're deadly. That's what I think was so scary about Amy Cooper's reaction. It's deadly. It's a deadly reaction.
But let's also go with, it has been deadly when white girls and black boys were having sex and their parents found out and parents said it was rape and black boys were put in jail for that. I mean, when black boys were looking at white women and they were lynched and killed for that. And so again, it goes back to my point of like, it is not new. And so it's sometimes hard for people to have like this new awareness about it. It is dangerous. It is deadly. And we must have zero tolerance for those words.
Well, that's a convenient, I mean, not knowing is a convenience of privilege. And as much as I think white privilege or fragility is taught, I think it's nurtured just as much. And I think it's nurtured through the lens of exceptionalism and entitlement. That we nurture those things into our people, our young people, so that those reactions become normative and deadly, to Dr. Boswell's point.
Yeah, I think that Amy Cooper, I mean, she, in the moment, you could see that she knew exactly what she was doing. She was, and not only that she was doing it, but she was telling him, like, here's what I'm going to do. And it was just so visceral. I think that the Amy Coopers of the world, I really would want them to look at Black men, Black people. When you see that George Floyd video, when you see in the next video, I would want for people who would make that call to look at that person as their brother and their sister or their sibling. And I'm not just talking about their Christian or their religious brother and sister. I mean, as a person who had the same womb that you did, that grew up in your household, that grew up with you, and actually see that person as a human being, but not only one that's a human being, but someone that you love and that you grew up with. And when we can truly do that, I think that then we're on our way, but not until then.
Thank you. I want to pose my closing question here with the limited time that we have. Where do we go from here? What is the application that we can apply? Any resources that you would recommend for anyone? What can we collectively do moving beyond this moment and this time together here?
Well, I can kind of go first. First and foremost, I really think it starts with education. We have had a miseducation in this country about our history, about whiteness, about blackness, about all of it. So I really think it starts with really educating ourselves with what happened historically. What does it mean to be Black? What does it mean to be white? One of the things that I wish we would do in this country, I wish we would have a minority history class. I don't like the fact that you have 6 weeks or 1 month of Black history. But I mean, I grew up in Texas. In Texas, we take 2 years of Texas history, but you maybe only get 6 weeks. And the history class you were slaves, then MLK came, you got rights, and now you have Obama. So everything's good. That is not the way history goes, and that's not the way it goes. And there needs to be a minority history class to talk about Black history, Native American history, Mexican history, Asian American history, all that. That's all part of our rich culture, which makes our country truly unique. And I think once we understand each other and understand the historical context in which we all come from, then we can truly have reconciliation. And then we can truly work together to have a better way forward. Because if I don't understand how we got here, I really don't understand the depth and the complexities to help us drive change forward and to really bring true racial healing and true racial reconciliation.
Josh, I just want to add that specifically history beyond slavery and civil rights and the Trail of Tears, because they will relegate, as you mentioned, our history to being very much, isolated to specific incidents. Yep. Anyone else here?
If I could just jump in to talk about what he just mentioned about history, I would love to see more of a focus, as he said, on my minority, and I really hate that term too, but I would like to see it all be taught as a part of American history. I think that the segregation and the hyphenation of Americans still makes it other. It still gives it that otherness. And I think that does a disservice to everybody. So I think if we can be more inclusive and make sure that when we're talking about American history, we include all the people who are in America and what has historically happened to them while they've been here, then I think everybody gets a greater appreciation for that complexity. So I would take that even a step further.
Thank you for that. Black history is American history.
I invite people to join me if they want for Restorative Justice Charlotte. We're asking people to apologize. We were wrong. We need to apologize for the wrongdoing. B, here's money towards the Black community to repair the wrongs that have been done. $90 for 90 years of redlining, $60 for 60 years since we dismantled Brooklyn. 3, let's change systems so that we don't repeatedly harm the African-American community and ultimately work to dismantling the systemic structures of racism.
I'd like to just speak to a minute to our white siblings who are here on the call or who are curious and it may feel like you're late to the conversation where I've been. I feel like I'm practicing in this work, and I always say that I always speak when I need to shut up, and I'm always silent when I need to be speaking. And to begin the work, to be in relationships, deep, really honest, authentic relationships with our siblings who have brown or Black skin, and learn and know them for who they are, but also to find a group to hold you accountable to doing the work. If you need one primer, and I know that First Lady Scott is really familiar with Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. That's the book my congregation uses, and that's the book that we start with. So just commit to starting and then walk humbly. Just walk humbly together with us, and you don't need to be great at it yet. Like, we'll get there together.
Amen.
Yep, I will just add on and say, I think 3 quick things. 1, raise your kids to be inclusive intentionally. Parenting is an intentional practice. So it can't just be, this is how it always is. You have to be intentional if you want to raise anti-racist kids that are inclusive and to really change the next generation. 2, I think that something tactical that you can do, if you see Black and brown people pulled over by the police, stay with them, watch, be there, be an ally, be a voice. 3, you have to check any behavior in your family and in your friend circle that is a little off the cuff. That's just your uncle. He's old. You can't change it. Your kids are watching, so they need to see you do it. Even if that person doesn't change, you're changing the narrative in your mindset of your kids.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I think, that I love that, being able to check that, Ms. Hatch, even if they don't change, at least, showing that, because observing us is so powerful. I think what Josh added, I think education is obviously, one of the biggest tools that you can do is just continuing to get educated on these issues, seeing where racial disparities are in the justice system, in policies that are made in the government, how is this coming about? Where is the history started? I know shout out several family members that have helped me kind of even understand these issues more. My aunt shared with me a video that I definitely will will post and send to you, Deb, but that if you remember Veggie Tales, the voice of Bob the Tomato, that he put out for Holy Point as a podcast, going through the history of how African Americans have been affected in our country today, and how some of these issues have gained this systemic oppression that they have been under. It really is a powerful video. I would invite any of you, if you haven't seen Just Mercy, to watch that. It's one that I know I personally, being someone that have kind of wanted to go into criminal justice before kind of going into the ministry, seeing the disparities that take place in the justice system, but especially in regards to the death penalty, it is atrocious. It is atrocious, and I definitely encourage you to watch Just Mercy as a way of enlightening yourself on that. And then I will just say the last two things. I will give a shout out to my sister, who is an educator and a teacher of our future generations. She's trying to be an elementary education teacher. And one of the biggest things that I've seen is, the images and the depictions that you use in the classroom or in movies that children see show people of color in the curriculum that you use, in the books that you use. Black history is not something that should just take place for 1 month out of the year, but something that you use in its entirety. And then the last thing I would just say is experience that, man, you just experience the other side, being able to stretch across, build friendships. I thank you, Mom and Dad, for letting my boys BJ and Mike sleep over at the house. The friends of color that I've had. Thank you for being accepting of them and letting my sister date all of the Black guys that she wants. I appreciate that a lot. So that's all I got to say.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and go. I would just to all the white folks that are watching and listening, I would just say I want to echo Dr. Scott's 4 R's, but I want to say that I think we don't know how to do those 4 R's as white folks, and that's why we keep struggling. We know the 4 R's. If you've been in a Christian church at all your life, you've heard those words said over and over again: repentance and restoration and reconciliation. But we can't repent for something we don't know what we did. This is why Baldwin's quote just keeps running through my mind. And I always ask people to begin by reading The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. I would strongly encourage all white folks who are watching this to do that. If we're trapped in a history we don't understand and can't be released from it until we understand it, we have to understand the history so we know what to repent for. And until we know what to repent for, we won't know how deep our restitution has to be. And then we won't know how radical our reparations have to be. Mm-hmm. And we won't know how serious it is for someone to imagine being reconciled to us who has been oppressed by the people racialized like us through 400 years. So we won't know how to approach any of those 4 R's unless we do our work and look at our whiteness. And white churches and white communities, white dominant spaces have to do the work of spending the time to study the history, the terrorizing legacy of whiteness, and to see themselves in that legacy so that they can begin to divest from it and abdicate from it and turn to make that metanoia move that Dr. Scott mentions about and turn away from the terrorizing legacy of whiteness and to see, if they study history really, they'll see that, as Dr. Eddie Glaude mentions, there would be no democracy in America if it wasn't for Black people who brought democracy to America through protest over and over and over again. There's not been democracy unless people who were oppressed fought for it throughout the history of America. So I would just challenge white people to do the work of looking at their whiteness.
For my St. Paul brothers and sisters, I want to recommend, if you have not read it, Why We Can't Wait by MLK. I want to recommend that, as well as I want to encourage everyone.
You would push an alpha, wouldn't you?
Yes. So please check that book out if you haven't. And for everyone at St. Paul, if you're invested in doing this work, continue to nurture with our brothers and sisters at other congregations. You're invested in doing the work, getting out in the community, please join the social justice ministry, reach out to me. We certainly could use your support in whatever means that you feel like you can step in and help us. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Scott.
Well, first of all, Reverend D'Angelo, man, thank you so much for being a great moderator. And to my executive assistant, Deb, in our chat room, we're calling her the basketball coach because she's been switching folks in and out and has done a wonderful job. And of course, Marco, for giving us the space to have this conversation through CAYA. St. Paul is a wonderful congregation that has really embraced the ethos in which I continue to build upon from my predecessors in the person of Dr. Moss and Dr. Drummond, as far as input into the community, have an impact on the community, and have an influence from the community that gives shape and formation as far as our ministry is concerned. So I'm appreciative to all who have made tonight so beneficial and have been praying for this moment, and it has gone off a lot better than I ever could have imagined. So thank you all. I'm not going to recapitulate what everyone else has said, because I think that each and every person in their own space brings wonderful context and experience, and of course lift as far as what we all can do to move to that place where the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King called the beloved community. So thank you all. We are indebted to our panelists, but more importantly, we are indebted to a God who allows for us, created in God's image and likeness, to come together and have a heartfelt, soul diving conversation that hopefully and prayerfully those who have been a part of this will take whatever they can from this and become agents of change through liberation, transformation, and redemption, to make the kingdom of heaven here on earth more meaningful. So thank you.
Amen.
Well, family, that is our time together. I am so elated that we had the opportunity to have all of these individuals with us this evening. I want to leave you just with one more thing. While you sit with all of the information that has been shared, know that there are a lot of resources that are on the St. Paul website, where individuals from this panel have shared information, and we have compiled it all and put it on the church's website. So you will be able to find that there. There's the link right there. Make sure that you go and visit our website for that information. And we want to close out in a little bit of a different way. Reverend D'Angelo Dia, who was a great moderator tonight, is also a spoken word artist. And we really want to leave you with the gift of spoken word that Reverend Dia has. So I bid you all adieu. God bless. Good night. Get ready to hear a word from my man D'Angelo Dia. Thank you.
For I know the plan I have for you, declares God. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. Emmett Till, 1955. Rodney King, 1991. Abner Louima, 1997. Amadou Diallo, 1999. Sean Bell, 2006. Oscar Grant, 2019. Eric Gardner, 2014. Michael Brown, 2014. Laquan McDonald, 2014. Natasha McKinney, 2014. Freddie Gray, 2015. Sandra Bland, 2015. The Charleston Nine, 2015. Keith Lamont Scott, 2016. Antoine Rose, 2016. Ahmed Aubrey, 2020. Breonna Taylor, 2020. Tony McDabb, 2020. George Floyd, 2020. My hands are up. I'm unarmed. I can't breathe. It's a passport, it's a book, it's a Bible. My hands are up. I'm unarmed. I can't breathe. It's a passport, it's a book, it's a Bible. I can't lie. I wasn't ready for another young Black man to enter the gates of young Black man heaven by way of profile projectiles popping off like it was natural, perhaps even traditional. I was still stuck on little Bobby Hutton, Fred and Mark, and all the conspiracy theories for Medgar, Malcolm, and Martin. I was still stuck in turnpipes where bullets blazed through afros and Black power subliminal threats, but there were no berets, Berettas, or banners, just young, black, and unarmed. I can't help but to picture Willie, Jim, and Sam all grinning at the continual onslaught of black skin, but more so the thought that I'd assumed that we'd gotten somewhere. You see, the more things change, the more they simply stay the same. Catch 22s, catch 44s, catch 45s, catching hell like always, walking to the store, reaching for your passport, playing with your children, jogging in the park, sleeping in your bed, worshiping at your church. But this ain't Syria, and this ain't Damascus, y'all. It's down south or up north or out west, and we're still arguing about our humanity in the midst of every political administration. And I'm stuck wondering, was the Obama era just another experiment like Jack Johnson in Germany testing the endurance of a Negro? They say race doesn't matter anymore. And while I'm digging the class struggle, I'm counting too many black brothers under white covers with white chalk lines, singing song lines like, what's going on? We know what it is. We're just waiting for the rest of the world to admit it. Hopefully, before another brother hits the pavement, my hands are up. I'm unarmed. I can't breathe. It's a passport, it's a book, it's a Bible. My hands are up. I'm unarmed. I can't breathe. It's a passport, it's a book, it's a Bible. My pain speaks to me. Like voices in an insane asylum, like voices in an insane asylum, like voices in an insane asylum, or a little child's imaginary friend. It reminds me that I'm real and that I'm still currently human. My pain has this bi-curious way of reaching deep into my spirit and uprooting the venom of strife like one does to old weeds corrupting a beautiful garden. But then again, it has a way of tormenting me with the memories of my past, projecting my life story before my eyes, as if it's a Paramount feature film, and I'm the only Negro in the audience wearing 3D glasses. But then again, it has a way of thrilling me by injecting adrenaline in my veins, pumping life in and out of my heart. Oh yes, our pain does that sometimes. I feel the pain piercing like light does tonight, never becoming polluted, always infinite. I'm abducted from my body and taken away to feel the pain of ages. From Vietnam to Watts riots, from Hurricane Katrina to the war in Iraq, from Ibrahim Adebisi to Keith Lamont Scott. So as I stand here spitting poetic words about love, pain, and forgiveness, how can I clearly say that I'm a human being experiencing spirituality, or that I'm a spirit experiencing these awful flesh tombs we consider bodies? But what is Christ-like love, pain, and forgiveness? For some, it may feel like a numbness, a nothingness, a stand-stillness. For some, perhaps it's like being a bubble trapped inside of an ice cube. They're simply waiting for time to melt it away. Better yet, it's like being trapped in quicksand. Once you're in it, you're in it. So why struggle or why fight? Because the more you struggle, the more you fight, the deeper some critic pushes you into the abyss. God's love, God's pain, God's forgiveness is like that of an hourglass. And all I know for sure is that as the body of Christ, we keep flipping that hourglass because God's love keeps pouring, God's pain keeps pouring, God's forgiveness keeps pouring. So all I can clearly say to myself, and all I can clearly say to others, must Jesus bear the cross alone and all the world go free? No, there's a cross for everyone, and there's a cross for me. My hands are up. I'm unarmed. I can't breathe. It's a passport, it's a book, it's a Bible. My hands are up.